Today, we're jumping right in and shattering a massive misconception. We are going to trace the hidden arc of money, starting from some totally fabricated ancient myths all the way to our very real digital future. So you've been told a story your entire life. Long ago, before money existed, people just traded stuff. You had a couple of chickens, your neighbor had some bread, and you swapped, right? Then, supposedly, that got way too clumsy, so somebody somewhere invented money to fix it. It's the classic textbook story. But here is the secret. Anthropologists have scoured the globe for 100 years, and they have never found a single society that actually worked this way. Literally, not one. The whole barter economy that supposedly gave birth to money, it's a complete myth. Money didn't come from trade getting too complicated. It came from something entirely different, and frankly, a little bit darker.
Well, if it didn't start with chickens for bread, where did it start? Before there were coins, before there were even little shells, there was debt. Picture a village, say 10,000 years ago. You help your neighbor fix his roof. He doesn't pay you right then, he just owes you. And that favor sits there as a memory, assuming he ever actually settles up, of course. That was the real first money. It wasn't a physical object at all. It was a memory, a record of who owes what to whom. And the crazy thing is, we can actually prove this. The ancient temples of Mesopotamia, they were recording these exact kinds of debts in silver 5,000 years ago, way, way before the first coin was ever struck. Money was quite literally invented just to keep score.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the inescapable loop it reveals. Because the second you can keep score, you can rig the game. Almost every single form of money humans have ever dreamed up over the last 10,000 years has followed this exact predictable arc. First, it gets created. Then people come to trust it. But then power captures it, quietly drains its value through debasement, and eventually it collapses. Whether it's shells, coins, paper, gold, or the digital numbers sitting in your bank account today, it is the exact same story repeating over and over again. Obviously, as these tiny villages grew into massive cities, that mental web of who owes who got way too big to hold in anyone's head. Societies desperately needed a physical stand-in, and humans tried almost everything. We're talking cattle, salt, cowrie shells all across Africa and Asia. They even used these giant stone discs on the island of Yap that were so absurdly huge and heavy they couldn't even be moved. But each of these actually worked for one simple reason. Everyone agreed the item was scarce. But here's the catch. Scarcity in the physical world is incredibly fragile. The very moment outsiders flooded a region with cheap shells from somewhere else, the local money just collapsed overnight. The objects changed, but that underlying weakness, it never did. Let's fast forward a bit to 600 BC and see how this all builds. Over in a kingdom called Lydia, which is in modern-day Western Turkey, they had these rivers just full of electrum, which is a natural blend of gold and silver. Great, right? Except every single lump had a different purity. So the Lydian kings came up with a brilliant solution. They melted it all down, fixed the exact weight and purity, and stamped every single piece with a royal seal. That stamp was a promise. You didn't have to carry a scale around anymore, you just trusted the face on the coin. But notice what just happened here. For the very first time in history, money and political power fused into one unified piece. And that handed whoever happened to wear the crown a temptation that absolutely no ruler has ever been able to resist. And Rome, well, Rome is where that temptation became a total science. The Roman denarius started off as an almost pure silver coin that citizens could implicitly trust. But as you can imagine, running a sprawling global empire is incredibly expensive. So the emperors discovered this sort of magic trick. They would take the silver coins back in through taxes, melt them down, mix in a bunch of cheap copper, and then just re-stamp them at the exact same face value. Presto, you've just created money out of thin air. And every emperor did it just a little bit more than the last guy, until by the year 270 AD, the denarius contained barely 5% silver. 5%! The empire was literally inflating its way into a crisis, and the money completely collapsed long before the empire actually fell. Now, while Rome was busy shaving down its metal coins, the other side of the world was making a massive leap. During China's Song dynasty, lugging around heavy strings of copper coins got totally exhausting for merchants, so they just started using paper receipts instead. Eventually, the government stepped in and issued official paper money. Later, when the Mongols conquered China, Kublai Khan made this paper money the only legal currency, backed by absolutely nothing but his command. Marco Polo was totally astounded by this. He actually called it the secret of alchemy. But paper has a very similar and honestly much more dangerous flaw compared to those Roman coins, because you don't even have to melt it down.
You just print it. And the emperors printed so much of it that the value plummeted straight to zero. It got so bad that the Ming dynasty eventually had to just crawl right back to using metal. So the crucial takeaway here is that for most of human history, money mostly sat still as a physical pile of stuff you could point to and count. Renaissance Italy totally changed the game. Back in 1397, the Medici family bank in Florence ran into a huge problem. The church considered charging interest on loans to be a sin. They called it usury. To dodge this rule, the Medici got creative. They hid the interest inside of a document called a bill of exchange, essentially dressing the loan up as a currency exchange across different cities. By doing this, money stopped being just a heavy pile of metal. It transformed into an invisible, fast, and totally abstract network. And here's the thing. The harder money is to see, the easier it becomes to quietly drain. So for centuries after that, the world tried to fix this glaring vulnerability by anchoring paper money to something a government absolutely could not fake: gold. The logic was honestly brilliant. Every paper note was simply a promise that you could swap it for a fixed physical amount of real metal. And by the late 1800s, most of the trading world was running on this gold standard. It worked beautifully, keeping prices incredibly stable. But gold has a hard physical limit. When World War I broke out, governments desperately needed to spend way more than their gold vaults actually allowed. So what did they do? They conveniently suspended the rule. They just turned off the standard and printed whatever paper they needed to fund the trenches. Turns out, the anchor was only ever attached when it was convenient for the people holding the ropes.
And one country gave us a perfectly terrifying example of what happens when you just completely let go of that anchor. After losing the First World War, Germany was forced to pay these enormous sums that it simply did not have. So they print it. And print it. Around the clock. By 1923, Weimar Germany experienced a hyperinflation so severe, so out of control, that prices were doubling every couple of days. People were literally burning wheelbarrows full of paper marks just to heat their homes, because the cash was actually cheaper than buying firewood. An entire nation's savings just wiped out. It was that exact same debasement cycle we saw in Rome and China, but violently compressed. We're talking about a drop from a slow burn over centuries down to a matter of mere months. The absolute ruin of that era dragged the whole world right into another world war. When the dust finally settled from that, a brand new system was forged at a 1944 conference in Bretton Woods. The US dollar was tied to gold at $35 an ounce, and every other major currency was tied to the dollar. The entire planet basically trusted America to hold the gold. And you know what? It worked, right up until the late 1960s. The US was spending massively on the Vietnam War and huge domestic programs all at the exact same time, sending out way more paper dollars than it actually had gold in the vaults to back up. Finally, on August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and completely cut the final physical link to gold. He told the public it was temporary. Spoiler alert, it was permanent. In that one single announcement, boom, we arrived at pure fiat money on a global scale. Fiat is actually a Latin word that literally translates to "let it be done." Today, that modern paper note sitting in your wallet, it's a claim on absolutely nothing. It is backed by nothing but our collective imagination and the direct command of the government. And once money is no longer chained to a physical rock in a vault, the supply has zero limit. A government can just create more whenever it chooses, literally these days with just a single keystroke. And the visual parallel back to ancient Rome here is just staggering. Because the supply has absolutely no limit, the US dollar has lost more than 80% of its purchasing power since Nixon cut it loose in 1971. Think about that. The number printed on the bill never changes, but that same bill just buys you less and less stuff every single year. This is a nearly identical tactic to what the Roman emperors did by mixing in copper and what the Chinese emperors did by endlessly printing paper. Only today, we don't call it watering down the money. We use a much more polite academic term. We call it monetary policy. So this fiat system kind of held up for a few decades, right until 2008. Banks had layered these enormous, crazy bets on super risky home loans, and the second house prices stopped going up, the whole tower came crashing down. The 150-year-old Lehman Brothers completely collapsed. To stop the entire global financial system from just halting completely, governments and central banks conjured trillions with a T, of new dollars on computer screens. They used this newly created money to rescue the exact same institutions that caused the crisis in the first place. Meanwhile, everyday people lost their homes, lost their jobs, and ended up absorbing the invisible costs through the slow, quiet erosion of their savings. It was a massive, historic breaking point for public trust.
Right as those bank bailouts were dominating the news, somebody out there was asking a very dangerous question. Why do we trust these institutions with our money at all? On October 31st, 2008, a person, or maybe a group of people, we still don't know, using the name Satoshi Nakamoto, published a short, 9-page document proposing Bitcoin. It emerged directly alongside the crisis. The idea was wild. Instead of trusting a bank or a government, you would trust a shared public record kept completely honest by thousands of computers. It answered to absolutely no king. It was strictly capped at 21 million coins, so nobody could ever just print more. And here is the truly incredible part. In a weird way, it was structurally designed to be a high-tech return to that very first ancient Mesopotamian idea of a shared memory ledger we talked about earlier. Only this time around, it was mathematically resistant to the debasement that destroyed Rome and Weimar.
But as we've seen through this entire explainer, power doesn't just hand over the keys to the money printer. The central authority's response to this new digital age is something called the Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC. Governments basically looked at digital money and decided, hey, we need to create our own state-controlled version. China is actually already rolling out the digital yuan to hundreds of millions of people as we speak, and over 100 other countries are actively exploring it. Now, unlike physical cash, which is totally private, a digital currency issued directly by the state can be fully tracked, right down to the penny. Plus, it's programmable. From a purely technical standpoint, it could literally be set to expire if you don't spend it fast enough, or even coded to block you from making certain types of purchases. And this brilliantly illustrates the crossroads we're standing at right now. We essentially have two completely diverging paths for our digital monetary future. On one side, we have decentralized systems like Bitcoin. It has a hard mathematical cap of 21 million, and it answers to absolutely no central owner. Then, on the complete opposite side, we have central bank digital currencies. These are issued directly by the state. They are programmable, trackable, and perfectly controllable by the issuer. So, one path operates as a decentralized mathematical limit, while the other operates as a highly centralized tool for state monetary management. For 10,000 years, money has never, ever been just money. It has always been the quiet, underlying machine that decides who holds power over whom. And the next major form of money, it is being decided right now. One of these two systems is very likely going to be running on your smartphone within the next decade. History shows us over and over again that the real trick of money is that it works on you best when you aren't paying attention. So, as we step into this digital future, I want to leave you with the ultimate historical question. Who will hold the controls?